Hi there. Welcome to the Isogo TV podcast from isogostrong.com. I am your host, Becky Hammond, and you and I gather here on this podcast to fixate on strength in our families and on our teams. Because when we start from assuming strength, we can make relationships easier. This is episode 110. In some way, your life today does not look like the life that you led just a few weeks ago. There's change and stress and the sense of crisis all around us. It's in a new way that feels pretty unprecedented in the last few decades. As a result, I'm taking a few episodes away from our scheduled series about the 34 Clifton strengths to talk instead about strengths in crisis. Because what I'm already hearing from leaders and families that are around me is that the reaction to this global crisis, it varies so greatly. I've heard a sense of hope and resilience, but I've also heard the fear and the overwhelm taking over. And that fear is what we're talking about today in today's episode. As we strive to be intentional about using our strengths to help us thrive in crisis, Maureen Monte today shares with us the importance of putting that overwhelm and stress out in front of us and truly labeling it before we can even start to overlay our strengths on it. Maureen is a beloved expert in the strengths, teams, and leadership world. And especially if you're a leader, you are going to draw some poignant takeaways about managing and thriving in crisis. She's like the crisis queen. So let's dive in with Maureen Monte. Well, hello and welcome everybody. This is Maureen Monte. Maureen, hello.
Well, how are you, Becky?
I am doing really good today. It's afternoon where I am and shooting from the mountains of Prescott, Arizona, which is I would have guessed we would have been here 2 weeks ago. So it's all a part of the 2 billion stories that are happening around the world with regard to how this crisis has impacted us. But I am really excited to get to know you today and about your strengths and how they have helped you in times of crisis and have helped other teams that you have led through crisis. I personally will be learning those things about you for the first time. And so I'm glad that we kind of get to do it here where other people can benefit from your experience as well. So thanks for being willing to chat with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. And wherever that is, that sounds pretty darn fabulous to me. So congratulations on being there.
Thank you. Well, why don't you just start off by telling us a little bit about what your life was like before the coronavirus hit, like what you did for work, what your family's like, whatever seems important to you about, what was life was like maybe mid-February.
It's a great question. And for me, this coronavirus life interruption has a huge silver lining because I was overwhelmed, right? And I've been overwhelmed for a long time. And frankly, if I were to think about the last time I took a vacation, I think it was when I was still in the corporate world. I used to work for IBM, and I decided to try living in Savannah to see if I wanted to move there. And I loved Savannah, and I lived there for 3 months. And I was a remote worker for IBM, so I could do that, right? I could go wherever I wanted to. And I lived in Savannah for 3 months. It was absolutely heavenly. But I was working, but that was like vacation, right? It really was. You're surrounded by history. I'm near the beach. So that was in 2014. And I don't think I've had time off since. I left the corporate world. And of course, self-employment is by nature not vacation oriented, and I just
you have
I
a
just
really
kept
mean
going,
boss
and
when you're self-employed, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I don't manage. One of my strengths is achiever. I don't manage that one well. And then I wrote a book, and then suddenly things took off from that. And so every time I would say I need to take time off, something really juicy would come my way, and I wouldn't. I could say no. I wouldn't say no. And so I didn't. And so most of my work, ever since I was exposed to Strength Finder in 2006 and a master's for leadership and business ethics, I've been using it with teams. I am at everything I do is teams and leadership, period. Strength Finder is a vehicle for dialogue for me. Okay. But it's not the be all and end all. And I'm not dissing the assessment. No assessment is a be all and end all. It is for me, it's a vehicle for dialogue. And because I work with teams, I am often in situations where the teams are struggling and in a crisis mode of some sort. So for me, this coronavirus thing, I watch with interest as how people react, right? And so at a high level, I mean, I guess I should stop there. Otherwise, I'm going to dive into what crisis and fear is with strengths. And I'm glad to do that next. But I want to pause so that I don't like take over this whole thing, which I have a possibility of doing as well, and say, see if you have any questions from that.
No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So now, were you doing most of your work live or most of your work virtually? What did that look like kind of before things started to spiral here?
You know, I do a lot of virtual work. I'm not concerned with that at all, having been a virtual employee for IBM. So my manager was in London, my colleagues were in Massachusetts and California, and we were virtual, right? So that's never been an issue for me. And what that gives me is global reach, right? I can work with a team in Singapore or in San Francisco or Kentucky. But if it's in Kentucky, I usually choose to drive because I do like face-to-face meetings. I'm in Michigan. And so I would say 20% virtual and 80% in person would have probably been the case. Although I do teach Cornell, I teach lead courses for Cornell, and those are all virtual. So a chunk of that is virtual. Of my time is that as well.
So give us a glimpse into how your life has been impacted. You know, we're 4 months from kind of the very beginning of this, and it slowly started creeping up onto our borders, and then as you know very well, into the heart of our nation. So what's different about your overall life in the last 4 weeks or so, or your daily routine? What feels like it's been most significantly impacted?
I feel a lot less stress, which is the opposite than it should be, because I should be stressed out about coronavirus, but I'm not. I'm not afraid of getting it. I've probably already had it. What I do fear, and we can talk about fear, is passing it on to someone else, or my mother who's older, or my brother. So I've become the grocery buyer, which I'm glad to do. I live alone. I never married, although I was engaged a couple times, both of those were a disaster.
So, that sounds like an entirely other story.
Yeah. Yes, that does. And so for a lot of reasons, I'm single, which I'm perfectly fine with. But so I've kind of had this blessing of a break, because looking at my workload, which much of it has been postponed, which I'm fine with, I did not see how I was ever going to get a break. And one of the teams I work with is an Olympic team, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen with that, for them. And they went from thinking it wasn't going to be canceled, because that's what they first said, to it being canceled, to being rescheduled. And so I've spent a lot of time with them, more time with them than we might have otherwise, on managing this journey. And my job with them is to help them take this extra time that they have, and turn that into a competitive advantage that others don't have.
Wow. Because
the Olympics been canceled for everybody. So how do you take this time that's frustrating, upsetting? Some people, this was their last year. Some coaches, it was their last year. There's a lot of emotion around it. How do you take that and make it a competitive advantage? So at my core, a lot of the work I do with teams, and it's only been exacerbated, if you will, or seems more important now as a result of this incredible, hammer that we've been hit by in all over the world, is to remember that at the core of a crisis is fear. And fear is individual. What you're afraid of is not the same thing that I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
Right? How you react to it is different than how I react to it. So, for example, and fear is an emotional reaction, not necessarily a rational one. Now, we have many reasons to be fearful of COVID-19, right? Sure. You should be more fearful if you're older and have health conditions, et cetera, et cetera. But if you look at other fears we have, so for example, 25% of the population has a fear of something called, let me get this right, glossophobia,
What's this?
which is the fear of public speaking.
Okay, all right.
So 25% of like for public speaking, for some people is a crisis. Now, it's not a crisis for me. It's probably not a crisis for you, but it's a crisis for them. 30% of us are afraid of snakes, like terrified. 50% of us are afraid to go in the ocean because there's sharks there. And yet, if we looked at the emotional versus the rational, right? So my job when I run into a team, because it's mostly teams and sometimes it's individuals who are in the middle of a crisis, is to, one, make sure I don't judge it through my own lens. In other words, why would you be afraid of snakes, right? Why would you be? So I'm not afraid, but you are. And then second of all, to never kind of undermine their emotions. In other words, if someone said, if you were to say, I'm afraid of a snake out here in Arizona, and there's probably snakes out there, by the way.
Oh yes, we just ran across one recently.
There you go, right? So if I were to say, don't worry, that's like telling you not to be so tall, right? You can't, it's worry, it is what it is. So in the moment, I almost always dive into with these teams that are in a crisis mode, into what is the root of the fear. Then we bring strengths in, for me. But we don't go to the strengths first. We go to the fear first, the crisis first. The what does success look like as an outcome out of this, at the end of this crisis? What would it look like? And so we define all that, and then we bring the strengths in. Now that we may have already analyzed our strengths, but I don't talk about it. I don't in the middle of a fear of a young athlete saying to me, I'm afraid my teammates are going to hate me if I lose this match. I don't say, oh, what strength is that?
Right.
Because that's not the time.
Right. And that's not a strength, really, right?
Like
that's not about the strength. I mean, I suppose maybe your strengths are feeding into why you might feel more, one way versus another. But it's as you're saying, it's the underlying, the core root of the problem, or the root of that panic or overwhelm or anxiety, that you're trying to set that out on the table, if I understand you correctly, and then say, okay, what tools do we have to help with this?
Right. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, it's my experience, right? This happens to be quite a young athlete that's made this Olympic team. And so I'm 60. I have more experience than she does, right? But you nailed it, though. That it's really not about, what strength is that. In the back of my mind, I'm going, okay, so 4 or 6 of her top 10 are relationship strengths. She's worried the bonds are going to break. Okay, so I get that, and so I talk about it from that angle, but I don't at that point bring it up to her, because they are not interested at that point in their strengths.
Right.
So that's where I think it'd be really helpful to say, that's my platform for dialogue, right? That's my platform for dialogue. But everything else I do around it is really geared towards overcoming those obstacles. And in many cases, that at that moment, that felt like a crisis to her.
Yeah.
Right. It isn't a crisis. It isn't going to be in the world if she doesn't do well in that match. The team's still going to like her. But in that moment, she's having a crisis. Right. Yeah. So that's where I think that I bring a lot of value to people. And I am always dead calm in a crisis. And maybe it's because my father died when I was 11 and I had 3 younger brothers. And there was always some sort of a crisis in my family. Right. And I don't say that in a way of like, oh, my crazy family. There just was. There was 3 boys and me, right? My mom was at good school. So there's a lot of reasons that I had been exposed to pressure at a young age. Yeah. And I was an athlete. That exposes you to pressure. So I think there's a variety of things. And then the way I'm wired, some of the strengths I have in my top 10, for example, are self-assurance, responsibility. And frankly, there's nothing that can happen, and there's no topic off topic that we can't figure out here as a kind of a collective wisdom on the team. So that's how I approach it.
Wow. And so tell us a little bit about, when you think about crisis, whether it's this kind of time of global crisis, that probably the only history that I've heard that's kind of is similar to this is the 1918 flu. They're kind of making some of those similar kind of back and forth about that. Of course, there have been world wars, but this is impacting people in a different way. So maybe it's about this crisis, or maybe it's about other crises that you have lived through and ultimately thrived through. Tell us a little bit about what do you think the role of your strengths were once you realized what the root of the crisis was, or what the root of the anxiety around the crisis was, and kind of how they helped you to be the calm in the storm like you're describing. And actually, you probably have to give us your dominant Clifton strengths as well.
Yeah. Why don't I start with that? So ideation, strategic, learner, achiever, individualization. I list maximizer next, but it isn't really, but I took Strength Finder twice, and in my top 5, it was maximizer once, and the other 4 remained the same, right? So, but in my top 10, which I do think play a big role, context, what's the history been like, responsibility, self-assurance. So there's some other tools I think I bring to the equation. And I can't explain why I'm always calm in the storm. I just am. And I don't know if it's the special blend, I don't know what it is. In my client environment, it's my individualization that gets to the root of their unique individual, either team crisis, and in some cases it is a crisis, meaning we've got problems with the management or the coaches, and we've got problems with the athletes. In other words, so it isn't just one person, it is a unit having problems. And I always treat them like a unit, a special unit. And then ideation will always have ideas on how to solve it. I'm responsible, so I'm careful that we're doing the right thing, right? So that it's kind of the medical first do no harm, right? So I try to live by that myself. First do no harm, right? And if I don't know what to do, then I don't say or do anything until I ask more questions and once I get the information and the data inputs in my top 10, then my ideation clicks in, and it's specific to that person, that team, and off we go.
I have a particular interest in healthcare because that's my background, and those are the clients that I mostly work with. And you were describing offline a crisis that you were able to kind of help through. So tell us a little bit about what was their core issue? What was that fear factor, or what was the kind of people getting overwhelmed and spinning around in circles about, and what did it look like as you overlaid either your strengths or their strengths on top of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was a healthcare company, and it was a merger of 3 healthcare companies. And that in itself, you've been in the medical industry. Let me try to be diplomatic. Harmony's way down there.
So, diplomatic, straightforward, let's just say, one of the 2.
Oh, I'm very straightforward, and I'll call it out, right? The smartest guy in the room, smartest person in the room syndrome was appearing, the know-it-all Olympics. Okay. And, but I didn't come in till it was falling apart.
Wow.
The merger had been happening. It was, because 50,000 jobs are at stake. And we need the leaders. This was a leadership team that's doing it. We need them to make this happen and happen well. And so to take these, and they're STEM people, they're scientists per se. So in general, and I'm an engineer, so I can say this, STEM and medical and engineering people are not as relationship oriented.
Sure.
So the know-it-all Olympics looked like people with 2x4s hitting each other about how stupid that was, right? So I did what I always do, which is I've written a book called Destination Unstoppable, and we define what success looks like out of this group. And they agreed, because I began to poke at the human stuff, right? Because it was clear to me. I could tell by how they treated me, right? that they had issues. And I don't expect to be treated like the Queen of England, right? But I could tell how they treated me. They're like, if you're treating your close colleagues like this, or the new people that are coming into your organization, right, this is not good. So in the end, one of the measurements of success was 360-degree respect. And once we got there, and once we talked about not just it was also very inward focused. I forced them to look at what the expectations were for a client experience. What does a great client experience look like as a result of this merger, right? So that was kind of how that all unfolded. And the person in the room who was least valued out of this brain trust of, let's say, 20 leaders, became the most valued because he had the relationship goods. He had the ability to bring that human glue, that kindness, to pull the team together. Because at the root of everything I do, if your team isn't unified, you're toast. You can be the smartest, bestest, most wonderful people, but a team has to be unified. So that was a big one, and I spent a lot of time with them. And I had one guy really push back on me and become almost completely uncooperative. But he said I was a bimbo.
It's a good start.
Which, with my low harmony, yeah, I thought it was absolutely hilarious. I'm like, here's this so-called mental giant calling me a bimbo. And so you just gotta kind of work. That's where I am grateful for my sports background, for being a female in engineering. There's not a lot you can do to make me feel bad, right? And if we want to fight hard, we can. Now, I'd rather not, but we can. And if it's for the best of the team, then I will. But otherwise, I just let some of that roll off my back, right? So, but there's just so many times when my ability to ask questions, to dig deeper into the core, and their fear was that it wasn't going to work, and it wasn't.
Okay.
But if we could get some, our arms around what success looked like from that. And I had a guy call me, and I had spoke to him, done like his top 5 strengths, and he called me and said, I'm about to be fired.
Wow.
And so first of all, is that true? Right? And it was true. And once I got further into it, I did not blame them for wanting to fire this fellow. And he was quite high up the chain. So we went from there to a much deeper dive, and what are they unhappy with, and what have you done? And we were able to resolve some of that, and got, in a time of crisis, once you're beyond the crisis, one of 3 things happen. You don't change a bit, you don't learn a thing. You change some, you learn some, or 3, you learned a lot. And your whole being can be transformed by that. That's why there really is that Chinese symbol for it is opportunity, and in a crisis is also opportunity, the same symbol, I think, for in like Chinese or something like that. But I will say, after working with him and then with his team, I think he's one of those he got some out of it. But I have a feeling that he will continue to make some of these mistakes. And the other thing about crisis and fear and working through a big obstacle is the universe is here to help you. And you can either listen and learn, or you'll not, and you'll continue to have the universe help you down the road. And by the way, that does not make him or anybody else a bad person. It makes them not ready. And so I'm a big believer in, you're not ready for that yet? That's okay. And it'll come and or it won't. But either way, you'll suffer the consequences of that decision. And I don't mean that meanly. I mean that with every outcome, there's consequences, right? Yeah. With every situation, there's consequences. So we have a lot more control over the consequences than we do the situation that we're in.
Right. Well, that's so very clearly paralleled to what's going on right now. I mean, we have very little control over the crisis itself, less probably than you and the team did, as they were able to kind of change things around
Absolutely.
a little bit. What, as you think about working with that team or with others, what parallels do you see to kind of what's going on right now, and kind of the panic and overwhelm that people are experiencing? And it makes me think of the smartest guy in the room thing. I mean, is it everyone's whacking each other, with that, well, I think this and I think that, and this is going to be horrible. No, this is not. This is a conspiracy. No, it's not. All these different things that are that we're kind of hearing and being inundated and flooded with, that that make that crisis spiral even further downward. What parallels do you feel like you can draw between your experience with crisis with teams or in your own history and what's going on right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of parallels, and I think what people forget, they forget the power of their own mind, and I don't mean, here's what I mean by that. I might have the kind of strengths that can create a complete movie, a complete opera, a complete disaster, Titanic movie inside my head, and my blood pressure goes up, and my worry about my kids, my worry about my job, my worry about, and some of those may be real. Okay, there may be reason to be concerned, but no matter what that movie is that you create, it will not be true. It will never turn out exactly as you imagine. And you can imagine it so clearly, right? You can see what a disaster, this is going to be terrible, right? And therefore, turn the volume down in your mind, right? Because you can also choose to focus on the things that you can do to take care of your children, to take care of you, to take care of the people that work for you. If you're working remotely, for example, those are the controllables. Right. So people get all caught up in what they actually can't control and don't do what they could do. And that is an entire waste of valuable energy. If I have half a cup of energy today, how am I going to use that to my advantage, to my family's advantage, to my team's advantage? Not creating the monster movie in my head and letting that play out over and over and over and over and over again. Right. Yeah. So crisis may come. The coronavirus may land at your doorstep, and until it does, do not rush down the road looking for it, right? So do what you can, eat well, buy the right food, only go once a week, do what you can, wear your face mask, all these things that they tell us. And don't buy into the political crap, it's their fault, it's China's fault, it's somebody's fault, somebody's screwed up. Okay, well, have you never screwed up? Because I doubt that's true. So just relax, take a deep breath. Remember, this is a chance for you to be a leader for your kids, for your team, for your neighbors. Find a way to do something positive with all that energy. There's plenty of organizations out there that could use money, that could use help, that could use Facebook support, spread the message, support the first responders, support the healthcare workers. There's all kinds of things that could be done that are a lot more valuable than that energy loop running inside your head that's of no use.
Yes. I was just thinking of that last night as I was going to bed. We have this like delay going on because we have satellite, we're in the mountains, all these things. And I'm like, I run a virtual business. Like I can't have delay on Zoom. And I was, doing tests on the internet speed. And I went to sleep thinking, this is dumb. I am wasting mental energy, as you say, mental energy. I'm wasting time on something that I have no control over whatsoever. Why don't I, if I am concentrating on some of the other good things, I could release energy to, concentrate on the kids or on having a better relationship with my spouse, instead of having this just kind of cycle go downward of something that I have maybe 1% control over, because I could turn off Wi-Fi on the other computers that are in the house, so I think that really, really rings true to me. It really rings true to me.
And your ability to do that is a gift, because it can be a problem solver, but like anything else, that when it's not well managed, it's not serving you. Yeah. So helping all of us do that. Now, listen to me, this is a case of physician heal thyself, because it took a coronavirus for me to take a month off, and which it isn't actually, because I'm teaching, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a gift for me. And it's shown me that this lifestyle is within my control. If I would choose it, right?
Yeah.
So
definitely.
There's a real blessing in it for me.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll just share one more quick thing. I got into trouble at the Canadian border And I have issues with borders. There's 3 or 4 situations with like embassies and things like that. I always end up in the doghouse. And I got on the bridge to go to Canada when what I was trying to do to get a Nexus card to go into Canada by bypassing the line. And I was there to register for it. But the signage was so terrible that I end up on the bridge to Canada. And then I turn around and I come through an entrance that I shouldn't have. Exactly. And it's a long story, but the guy's yelling at me. He's like, do you know I could throw you in jail and give you a $5,000 fine? And this is when I had a lot going on. This would have been in January. And I felt like saying, dude, throw me in jail, please. I can't think of a better place to be right now than to have like a month in jail where I can't do any work and work myself to death. So
what you're saying is this is your fault,
instead of the
right?
month in jail. I guess I am saying that, and I'm sorry about that to everybody out there. I'm sorry about that. So, I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go right ahead.
No. I love that. I love that. Sometimes we just need a break that we can't give ourselves. I have had that experience in my life. I lead with achiever. I'm achiever number 1 as well, and so I've had different times in my life where things were just whack. No, you can't work anymore, and and then seeing the beauty and the value of a pause. And then, hopefully the idea is, and you said it yourself, do we not change? Do we change a little, or do we change a lot during crisis? Like, the hope for people like you or me is that we can say, okay, I'm not ever going back to that exact same thing, because I could sense that I was going crazy. I was driving too hard or driving too much. I was tired. I was, but I couldn't do anything. I wouldn't do anything about it. And now look what the benefits that there are. I'm still productive. I'm still helping people, but yet, I can breathe. I have space. I mean, that is,
exactly.
It's amazing that you're feeling that so tangibly, even so soon, really at the beginning part of the most likely impact of this virus around the world for months to come.
Yeah, no, that's that. And you said it beautifully. And I'm going to ask you to be my accountability partner, to check on me once a month and say, and I'll deny everything. How's your achiever doing? Right?
Everything's fine. Yeah, everything's good. I'm fine.
That would be helpful. That's funny. But you're right. And this is where, all of us have a chance, especially if we're in the business of helping people, we have a chance to live our values here, live this a little bit ourselves. So that's my goal.
Well, it was really helpful and insightful for you to walk through a crisis with an organization. And then we overlay our current kind of global crisis on top of that to see, like, if I'm struggling as somebody, if I'm struggling in this virus, what would I do if it wasn't a global pandemic? What would I do if it was me running a team that had extreme conflict? Or what would I do if it was me as a part of a leadership team that was going through a merger? Or what would I do if it was, a variety of things or maybe it's, what would I do if it was me and my family in a crisis and one of my kids just got sick, right? What would I do in those situations? And then how can I apply that to this bigger thing? Because I think sometimes it's just like, it's too big. It's too overwhelming. We can't think of what would be the best reaction from me right now? How can I draw the best out of my strengths to address that fear that we put out on the table? And thinking about it in a team perspective, leadership or family perspective, it really provides a good word picture and kind of breaks it down into a smaller bit.
Yeah. And I think, it's such a great question. And there's nothing wrong with having those feelings of being overwhelmed or that this is really a crisis. And it is. One question, there's a guy out there named Eckhart Tolle, T-O-L-E. I don't know if that rings a bell to you, but he was on Oprah 1,000 years ago, and that certainly was good for his business. And he's got a book out there called The Power of Now. And one of the questions he asks in that book, I ask people, particularly individuals, when they're in a crisis, and that is, what do you need that you don't have right now? So what do you need that you don't have right now? Yeah. And that helps us get to the root of it, because almost all of it, you do have everything you need right now, right? the core of it. You have food, you have air, you have water, you have your family around you, but that you've gotten so far ahead of in your own disaster movie mind or whatever that's happening that you're creating a need that's may come someday, but it isn't right now. So that staying in the now, right, which is so hard to do and so easy to say. So that's the only, when you said that, that made me think of that. And I have used that plenty of times. What do you need that you don't have right now?
Yeah. 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 It's
And
a question that really can
and that's
drive you
okay.
into the moment, instead of, like you're saying, that movie that you're creating in your head, the toxic voices, the tapes that are kind of playing the future that will never be. Wow. Wow. That's good. Well, as we kind of wrap it up here, what advice or encouragement would you give to, maybe, based on your experience, like what advice or encouragement would you give to a team or a leader who has now found themselves in this situation that we're pretty much all in, and is feeling that sense of overwhelm, that sense of stress, and just can't really feel like they don't really feel like they're able to get out of it?
Yeah, I think it gets back to, so if that were without any discussion about strengths or anything like that, I would be asking them to write down what the challenges are. Write them down. Okay. Then I would say, which one is this week? Which one is next month? Which one is right? I would add some structure around what the challenge, where are they? And also prioritization. Which one is most important right now? So let's say you can't make payroll. Your company can't make payroll. Let's say you're working for a restaurant and your company you have a restaurant and your company can't make payroll. I would consider that high priority, right? So once we get the things settled down, then what are your options? And almost always, if we add some structure around the problem, we see solutions that we can't see that are, and by the way, all the answers are there for them, right? Or someone can help them, right? Like another business person, a bank. All the answers are there. The answers are there somewhere. And it may even be within the team. But if you don't have it identified, what those problems are, then you're less likely to solve them, obviously. And second of all, when you're on the other side of this, what will that look like, right? Going forward, because sometimes it's also how can I prevent this in the future? Because people see that it's going to happen over and over again. People being absent, for example. So my point being is adding a little bit of logic. I saw a guy say recently, and I thought it was beautiful. He said, he was talking about the power of prayer in this time, and he was speaking to business people, not just normal quote people, right? People in business pray too, because prayer is calming and prayer is giving. And he said, of course, staying in prayer and close to your sense of your higher power, something bigger than you. And then the second thing he said, and I think this is so critical, he said, we have reason. God gave us the ability to reason. Use your reason. Use your wisdom, use your knowledge, use your ability to think logically. And some of us that's easier for than others, right? But at some point in that noodle of everybody out there, there's reason. So listen to that. That would be my take.
Wow. I love it. I love that. It basically is breaking down something that feels so enormous into, what am I really worried about? And what is it? What can I do about it? And the things I can't do anything about, what am I going to choose to do with those in my mental space? And we already talked about that, earlier, is how can we choose to just concentrate on what we can control and let the things we can't control start to work themselves out. Wow.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's easy to say. And
yeah,
very hard to
I know. Very, very, very easy to say, much harder to do. And I think in the end, I love that you're helping us see that we can get to the root of what really is at the bottom of the overwhelm, putting that fear out in front of us. What am I really afraid of? And then we can start to break it down into smaller bits and start to apply our strengths over the top of that. And exactly. That it's okay to have those feelings, and that fear, and that we can do something about it though. We don't have to be stuck there. We don't have to be trapped in it.
Yep, we don't. We do not have to. And it's hard work to get out of it, but you have control over that. So one of the reasons, when I wrote my book, I did battle with my brother, and he was right. I have a brother that owns a marketing company, and I did battle with my brother over the title. And the title I wanted ended up being the subtitle. But I think it's important for this time of crisis. If you have a team, and families are teams too, no teammate should be left behind, because every single person adds value to that team, maybe in ways you don't understand, and that's where Strength Finder can help. So my book is actually called Destination Unstoppable. I've got a copy of it here. There we go. It's called Destination Unstoppable, but the subtitle is The Journey of No Teammate Left Behind. And I think there's no better time for leaving nobody behind on solving this problem and I mean, even in our little world, right? Yeah. So I would recommend it.
Very good. Well, Maureen, thank you so much for being here with me today in the mountains, and I being in your house in Michigan, and just being willing to share your story and your history and your background, and kind of what ends up being your sweet spot in some parts of what does it look like to lead through crisis? What does it look like to help others through crisis? So thank you for sharing your story and for giving us some encouragement and some tips along the way as we're all in this global crisis together.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be on your show.
That activity she shares really helps sort out all the confusion, doesn't it? And I definitely personally have continued to just ruminate on this idea that it's really a waste of energy and time and mental space to fret over things that I can't control, like the speed of my internet service. Maureen Monte is an active blogger over at maureenmonte.com, and she shares into a wide circle of influence. And as she shared in an episode, she wrote a book called Destination Unstoppable that is available everywhere books are sold. Almost prophetically, she wrote so that we would have a guide to help leave no one behind in crisis, even on this global scale. So do connect with Maureen Monte on LinkedIn, Twitter, and even on her YouTube channel. She's a wealth of wisdom and experience, and your team and leadership will be better because of connecting with her. Her name is spelled MaureenMonte, so be sure to connect with her. In the coming episodes, we continue to hear from some amazing business owners, healthcare leaders, coaches, and friends as they share their perspective and stories about living through strengths in crisis. Since the goal of this series is to help each other, let's connect over on Instagram to share how we've seen strength show up in crisis. Tag or direct message me with your story or your idea. On Instagram, you can find me at IsogoStrong. I would love to connect with you there and swap stories. Also, if you are new to the strengths concept, or you're just getting spun up on your own top 5, and you're curious about what it might look like to feel more of this thriving in this global craze, I'd love to help give you a jump start as your virtual coach. It's super easy to start, and since you're here today, I'd love to get you $5 off the Strength Startup Virtual Coach Kickstarter, which makes it under 20 bucks. In this email coaching series from me that you get insights and into your talents and your strengths, as well as some action that you can take to make relationships easier around you, in stress and beyond. If you go over to isogostrong.com/strengthstartup, you can check it out there. And then use the code VIRTUALCOACH5 for $5 off. I'd be honored to get a chance to get to know you. You and your strengths have the power to make a ripple effect in your family and on your team, and then ultimately across the entire world. We can feel that now more than ever. The world needs your strengths. So learn them, love them, and live them in your own circles of influence. Until next time on Isogo TV.